Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, What's Happening with Ransomware, MSP Cybersecurity Trends and Strategies. I'm Miles Skoda, the web editor for MSP Insights, part of the Business Solutions Network, and I'll be moderating today's event. So, there's no denying that ransomware is rapidly changing, and these changes represent a profitable opportunity for managed service providers. Your clients need your help in knowing how to protect themselves against an attack. With this in mind, on today's webinar, you'll hear from George Anderson, Director of Product Marketing at Webroot, who's going to provide you with insights on how you can help your customers by finding out what matters most to them when it comes to ransomware and ransomware attacks. At the end, we'll be holding a Q&A session following George's presentation, so feel free to submit questions as we go along. We'll get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A, and any that we can't get to, we'll follow up on after the event. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to George to start us off.
All right, thank you, Miles. That's a great introduction. Actually, we're going to sort of do things in two parts. The first part, we're going to look at really the MSP and ransomware trends, and that's really from a recent survey that we conducted with about 500 MSPs. So giving us feedbacks on just on what they found with ransomware, and I'll sort of open up with that. And then I'm going to look really at an example of ransomware and how Webroot, helped to deal with ransomware as well, because that's sort of being here from Webroot too, I need to explain that. But then we're sort of open for any questions. There will be some tips along the way as well about what we do, what you can do to sort of stop ransomware. Because actually the findings from this survey were rather surprising for us. We thought things were far more under control, I suppose, than they actually are. So let's just start with that and start with sort of almost like a summary and an overview. We as Webroot, we continue to see a lot of criminal internet activity and technology that's advancing at sort of quite an alarming rate in some ways, and bringing many new ways for cyber criminals to attack both their customers' networks and endpoints every day. And it's something we see, and we're obviously spending a lot of time stopping it as well. But as a result of that, I think we find many MSPs are facing increasing numbers of challenges when it comes to protecting their clients. And this is actually what came out very, very strongly in the survey, and quite surprisingly so, because we thought MSPs probably would be some of the best prepared for these sort of things. And those sort of things can actually stretch even the trust between the MSP and the client too. So it's quite interesting to see that at such a high level. So as I said, really, I suppose the overall summary and finding of the report was that when we asked MSPs, nearly 70% of them are not completely confident that their clients' endpoints are going to be secure against future ransomware attacks. And maybe, I think we found that surprising. We thought, it depends what you mean, I suppose, by secure, but I mean, we thought there'd be a lot of different methods that they were going to be able to secure by. So let's look at we're going to look quickly who we surveyed, because it's good to understand what MSPs we asked. They weren't, by the way, our customers. These were MSPs who weren't our customers, so just to give you an idea of the spread in that sense. So we looked at people, MSPs, and the number of endpoints they have under management and their managed services revenue. And you can see there that we have about 63% turning over just about under $1 million in managed service revenue, and 52% managing under select 500 endpoint seats, if you like, and almost 3/4 managing under 1,000 seats. So it's a good spread, if you like, of what I would call typical MSPs. We asked them then how they obviously make their money, because MSPs make their money in different ways, and it's good to understand really how committed these MSPs we're serving are to the managed services model. And the majority reported that they had used a hybrid, MSP reseller business model. So they combine, traditional break-fix and VAR reselling activities with newer, proper managed services offerings. And among the respondents, about 40% classified themselves as their business as 75 to 100% service-based. So in some ways, you can see there's a lot of that hybridization around there. And I think this really sort of shows, as I say, the shift. There's still a shift going on between people who have been doing traditional VAR channel type business and MSP business, and a lot of the new entrants are particularly, and these are, I would say, smaller MSPs. A lot of them, so typically they reflect that part of the market, but still nonetheless, the key segment of the market. Another thing we ask MSPs about, which is also really an interesting thing to do, is how automated are you about doing that? Because that really gives you an idea of the maturity of the MSP you're dealing with. The more mature the MSP, the more sort of tools they tend to have in place, either homegrown tools or actual external tools. And this only asked about the external tools. So we're asking about RMM, remote management and monitoring users, and PSA users, if you like. So it's actually slightly small for the RMM side, but again, that probably reflects the size of the MSPs who were surveyed rather than anything else, and the fact, as I said, they could have homegrown solutions as well. Whereas if we look at the PSA side of it, which is professional services automation, and maybe at the building side, if you look at it, a lot of those guys are the surveyed who actually have gone into PSA. So there's very better systems for actually building and tracking building and managing that size and automating that size of their business. So it just gives you an idea about what the group is and just gives you more sort of color around the MSPs we actually spoke to. Another thing which is really interesting, and in fact, we have lots of MSP meetings. In fact, we had an HTG meeting last week with a local chapter of HTG here, and we actually had quite a few of our MSPs in actually on the Wednesday. We're having another chat with them about how we communicate with them and various things like that. So it's really interesting. We always ask MSPs, how do you, what peer groups do you use? Because I think MSPs in particular, speak to each other a lot, and they tend to use the peer groups to get independent and sort of advice away from the vendor and away from people like us and the other vendors that serve that area, and that's fair enough. I mean, we're real believers in that the best way to find out about a product is actually to ask somebody either who's using it or a peer group. So, just interesting thing here was who they're using. CompTIA came out very high. True Methods came out very high. HTG again was the third one, down 28%. And there was sort of a whole lot of others too, but things from SaaSmax and really right down to PDA, which is very small, about 4%. But really, roughly 25% of those we survey really belonged to an industry peer group. And as I said, that underscores the importance of peer experience and word of mouth. And in fact, what we did find out is that many MSPs are more than members of one group. They're actually participating in a number of different groups too. So it's obviously very key to discovering information and getting things out. As part of the survey, we also said to the MSPs, what matters to your clients? What are the things, that really sort of stand out as being absolutely key to your clients? And overwhelmingly, the key takeaways from this data are that clients not only expect a certain level of quality in the services they receive, but also place a great deal of importance on the individual working relationships. And I don't think that's surprising, actually. I think if somebody is asking you to look after part of their business, part of their IT for their business, that relationship, that strength of bond has to be quite strong in the start. That trust has to be quite strong in the start for people to sort of to hand over that sort of role, if you like. So the things that came out there was, quality of service was the highest thing. Working relationship, personal touch was very, it was like half, 50%. Being a trusted advisor, about 40%, and quite noticeably things like price was down about 36%. And I think maybe most surprisingly of all is breadth of services was only 12%. So it sort of sounds that, again, because of the size of these MSPs, they probably don't have a huge range of services, but that wasn't really the important factor about why they were choosing. All the other things were, and I can see quality of service and working relationship and the trust thing, as I said, all being absolutely key to MSPs and the relationships with customers. And that has some bearing on ransomware too, because obviously if a ransomware attack happens, then that trust is impinged on in a great way, and your customer's going to say, what the heck you're doing about that. We did also ask those MSPs the services that the clients are buying from them. And the findings indicate the majority of MSPs really offer quite a few services to their customers, and often in a standardized bundle. This, of course, helps them maintain consistency of quality and cost and reliability for both the customer and the MSP. And something we're increasingly finding is that more and more MSPs have very fixed, if you like, solution stacks. They might offer a choice within that, but it's quite fixed. So things like traditional help desk and support came out first, 70%. So that's really going back to break fix areas, if you like. Network and infrastructure was 66%. Security, which obviously I'm interested in a lot, and you guys should be interested in a lot too, was like 60%. Cloud services, 57%, so that's desktop as a service and those sort of things, as well as desktop server hosting in the cloud, etc. Wireless and mobile computing came out quite highly, nearly 50%. And then communications, data, and voice came out quite high too, at 42%. And whenever I was speaking to an MSP last week, and a lot of their work is around actually that telecoms area. So it's quite interesting to see that sort of come in so strongly as a service thing for MSPs, but obviously a great need. So that gives you sort of who we we sort of did the survey with, what sort of things they were finding in the way of services and things they were offering. But I suppose the really interesting thing we were asking about was what we're trying to get to, which is ransomware, obviously. So let's just turn and see, why we got to that quite shocking stat that 70% of them were not very confident in able to protect. And I mean, this year we've seen things like WannaCry, NotPetya, I suppose the things that most people have top of mind. WannaCry probably very avoidable if you had a patching regime in place. NotPetya looks more like actually a deliberate attempt to do cyber sabotage and actually not really be very worried about the ransom part of it. So I'm not sure if I would call NotPetya ransomware, even though the vehicle was like a ransomware vehicle in the sense it encrypted things. But what did the MSPs tell us? And that's really what's most interesting. So how bad is it? I mean, that's obviously the question we all ask. And again, that answer shouldn't be very surprising. It was sort of pretty bad. 78% of the MSP surveys reported that their clients have been hit by ransomware in the past year. So that's huge. That's almost 80%. That's nearly 4 out of 5 had said that. And as probably you can see from this chart, quite a few were hit multiple times. So you had 2 to 5 times was 44%. 10 to 25 times was 11%. It's quite high stats there. So thing to be worried about. So it's pretty bad. I think if we say 4 out of 5, I think we're not far off the ball. And maybe that again reflects the high worry factor that's about being able to protect in the future. Another interesting thing which always comes up when we discuss ransomware and what's going on there is to pay or not to pay. And put in the situation of being held to ransom, we sort of said to the MSPs if they had or they would pay up. So in fact, 12%, 1 in 8 had paid up. And actually, to me, that's a good sign because it sort of says to me that there's something else in place and they didn't need to pay up. So that's actually a good sign. And 80% had not. So as I said, that's a really good thing to see. And it's presumably because there's good defenses in place. But actually, if you were faced with a situation of getting to pay the ransom to protect the customer's data, it's quite interesting, obviously, that almost 80% again would be prepared to pay up to do that. So there's a real understanding of the significance of the loss of data and what can happen to a ransomware, especially a smaller business being attacked by it. So it's very, very important. Prevalence of ransomware, and this is really surprising. We sort of if we go back to the idea that nearly 4 out of 5 said they'd got hit by ransomware. We actually asked them what do you see in the way of trends with ransomware, if you like, what's been the prevalence? And because this is so effective, we all know that it's grown massively. But in fact, the results that came back were actually slightly different because only 44% thought it was actually greater, which is actually, of course, the fact. 30% thought it was about the same, which it obviously definitely is not. And 26% thought ransomware was less, which is where we'd like to obviously be at, but that's, again, definitely not that either. So really 56% of those surveyed actually felt they'd seen less. So goodness knows what happened to them in 2015, but that's just or 2016 just so it doesn't bear thinking about really. So quite an interesting sort of turn on that particular question. Things that also are interesting, particularly from a security perspective, but also I think generally is what sort of ransomware varieties are actually hitting these their customers and their clients the most. We're keen to find that because obviously it instructs us about what they've seen, what we've seen, and we can do comparatives and various things like that. And also we know that ransomware has been a lot more successful usually in the past 12 months. Not with us, but we know it's been successful out there because of the amount of people being hit by it. And it was interesting to get that back. But the top 3 were CryptoLocker, something actually that Webroot originally built its business with MSPs on. In fact, when we first started to do things back in 2014, I think, when we were sort of selling and saying we sort of stopped CryptoLocker at that stage. So and to see that still, 3 years later, still hanging around. CryptoWall, which is like a variant of that, and things like Locky, uses lots of macros, and then Tesla and Cryptex were sort of about fourth equal, if you like. But really, we had sort of 11 variants. You can see them up there on the screen that sort of that dominated. And of course, as I said, CryptoLocker, CryptoWall, and Locky were really, by and far sort of the largest one. CryptoLocker, as you can see, there's got a massive share compared to the rest. So just an interesting thing to note, and maybe why people are they're concerned about CryptoWall still, or CryptoLocker still, should I say. Another sort of important thing, obviously, when you get ransomware is how long does it take you to remediate? How long does it take you to recover from that sort of attack? So we asked that question and so said to him, obviously in an MSP world, every call is money and, time is money, et cetera, and time is profitability. So the least amount of time, the better. So 62% spent a day or so or more, so that's quite significant. In fact, 21%, 1 in 5 spent, over a week, if you like, remediating malware. So the impact really, all this really says is really, it's not only significant in the sense of, if you like, affecting the customer, it's significant in a sense of the time it takes for the MSP to correct and recover from those situations. So quite a lot of efforts required there. We then obviously asked, what's the most effective way to protect against ransomware? So luckily for us, they came out with sort of things like antivirus and anti-malware. I think, as a first line of defense, that is obviously where you start. But things like regular backups, obviously very key, business continuity, if you like, and disaster recovery coming out sort of close to that, if you like. Employee cybersecurity training, which I mean particularly, actually I'm going to go on and discuss phishing in a little bit in a few more slides, and in fact yesterday Webroot announced the fact that we had purchased a company called SecureCast, which does security awareness training, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that. I mean, we feel that particular area has been ignored and is absolutely, just because of the type of attacks and the fact that social engineering and targets, if you like, against the user are now so high, this is something that people can no longer ignore, and it's something they've got to do. So obviously we felt if we're a security company, we can probably do that better than a training company as such. So interesting announcement. If you didn't see that announcement, just on the side there. But obviously an important strategy here, and I'll explain that a little bit why in that in a minute. And then things like anti-ransomware add-ons. I know some of our competitors and some other companies actually offer sort of particular products against ransomware. I won't comment too much on that. I think the only thing I would say is it's a cost-benefit analysis there. The increment is quite small, and it's a lot of money in some cases. So very important thing, email spam filters is the last one there, and actually stopping, being able to control things at the email gateway and doing lots of filtering at the email gateway is a really good way of stopping attacks again. And as I said, I'll sort of deal with that a little bit later, because I'm going to discuss how we, Webroot tackle that, and it's sort of tied into that area. Sorry, bring my pardon my copying there. So next thing was really, as I said, this preparedness for the future, for future ransomware. How well equipped did those MSPs feel they were prepared, for ransomware that they were going to experience in 2017, 2018? And the response was really disappointing overall. 69% reported a lack of confidence that their clients' endpoints are secure against future ransomware attacks. That really just infers to me that they expect, as I said, a lot more infections, and they expect a lot more cleanup activities. And I think that's a very good place to be. I mean, I think I'd far prefer that preparedness was really much, much higher than it is. 30% saying probably they're prepared. So 1 out of 3 is not very good. You'd really want it to be. You really probably want to, but I'm completely the other way around those stats. So not very good feedback at all. So we do publish a guide, an MSP's guide to not being a ransomware victim. Again, it covers things in general and specific. It's got actually quite a lot of detail in it. And top tips are, actually this was written before, as SecureCast was obviously educate users. Obviously simulating phishing attacks, those sort of things. But there's actually a lot of other things that security awareness I think you need to give to users just apart from phishing simulations in that area. That's very key, but there's a lot of other things that are key too. So it's far more balanced than just a one-off effort. Obviously looking at multi-vector protection, in other words, really having different sort of security layers to stop the ransomware getting through. So what you're doing at the firewall, what you're doing again at your getting the situation with your patching, so as Adobe Reader and Java and other plugins, all things that are used to get in, presenting, user error with having things like add pop-up blockers and things like that. There's a whole lot of quite straightforward things that are available, can be used, and sort of make it really easy to do that. Obviously, putting the operating system itself to work. There's lots of good features in Windows and even down sort of like crypto, if you like crypto yourself, and using BitLocker and using the facilities there. But things like blocking VSS, volume shadow, and disabling, Windows script hosting, VBS, filtering executables in different ways, again from emails wherever possible, all good things to do. And then the backup is obviously use a secure cloud-based backup service. That's obviously going to be probably the easiest and quickest way to be able to restore information. And then setting up in a sense offline air gaps with multiple copies of each is very, very key to have. A lot of malware these days will sit and reach out, if you like, and look for network shares and look for other areas. So the air gapping side of it's got to be considered, and the fact that they might wait over time. So we did see something like that with Karanger, which was a Mac ransomware, which obviously hung around for 90 days till all the sort of backup copies that Mac standardly keeps sort of expired, and then actions, because it then knew there'd be no backup to recover from. So that area, you got to think about that strategy a little bit too. And if it's affordable for your customer, I always think that if the business is absolutely cannot afford to be down for an hour or anything like that, then they need to be really thinking more about business continuity and that sort of thing, where you can actually switch them right over to something else. So I hope that's sort of that's really covered sort of the ransomware and survey. I'd like now to spend probably about 10-15 minutes just discuss, before we get to questions, just discussing really how Webroot handles ransomware, and to sort of take you through a sort of a typical case. I mean, just to accept the fact that this is unfortunately going to be like 30,000 or 60,000 odd feet, but it'll give you an idea of some of the dynamics that are going on and some of the ways that you can think about this as well, which I think is very key. So one of these slides, which I always like the slide because, in fact, the first stat there, 90% of phishing was behind 90% of security incident breaches in 2016. That's actually from Verizon's annual report, something they've been doing for a number of years now. More and more companies are contributing to it. It's a very good sounding board, and it's pretty independent in the sense there's not really any vendor that's sort of saying that. It's more to do with actually customer feedback and a customer survey. So from that point of view, very trustworthy. But it's actually a surprising stat that 9 out of 10 security incident breaches in 2016 were started by a phishing attack of some sort. So that's, again, maybe there's emphasis on security education, simulated phishing, etc. Similarly, I think on the other side, I mean, our stats the year before, the stat was 97%, so it's actually dropped a little bit. But when we look across our own customer base, and we look at the infections that we're stopping and that are coming in there, 95% of all those infections are unique to that single endpoint. So that really means that most malware as such is unknown. It's almost like a 0 day in that sense, or a 0 hour. And that's just because of the capability of the cyber attackers to randomize and to be able to do things with the attacks to make them completely different for each other, even though they may be part of the same family or part of the same modus operandus when they actually land on the machine. But it's just an interesting thing to say, and I think it really reflects back more if you were relying more on signature type technology to stop things, then you're going to lose that battle, because basically you're not going to recognize actually what's happening in the machine. So just an interesting sort of that place to start. And one of the things we're also emphasizing a lot of these about Webroot, and I think about some other vendors too, because we're not the only vendor that does this, but nonetheless, we're I suppose among the next generation vendors, we're one of the ones that does the most, in fact, is the fact you've got to look at what we call multi-vector, multi-stage protection, that you've got this attack stage happening, where that's coming through email with the web browser, you've got the payload delivery stage, and you've got the infection and remediation stage, and each of those areas, you need to have defenses and things that are either going to prevent and stop attacks happening in the first place, and protecting that user, or actually, if something's actually starting to happen to the device, that you've got things in place to actually protect the device itself, and to then remediate what's happening. So I'm going to take you through a story of that. This just shows some examples of some of the things, the Web Threat Shield, the bottom lines there are sort of things that, various shields and defenses that we have in place. And again, as I said, this is very 60,000 feet, so I'm not going to delve into that in a lot of detail. But let's look at a typical, real-world scenario phishing attack, and obviously I've chosen that because of the Verizon statistics. So if 9 out of 10 successful breaches are happening that way, then one of the most important things you can do in your defenses is look at how do you stop a phishing attack. So, a typical example here, you get a phishing email. It's probably from someone like United States Postal Service asking if you want to track a package. You might think, well, have I got a package or whatever? But a lot of users will just nonetheless click on that link. That opens their web browser up. Something comes down rather nasty, and basically, the cyber attacker's off to the races, if you like, and is trying to infect that machine. So it's a very clever route to do it, and it's a very simple route to do it. And we see lots of variants on this because we see things where there's a document, for instance, maybe a Word document attached, and someone will open the Word document, and actually the Word document's completely safe, but there will be a little button on the Word document that will say, well, you need to enable the security, a message from Microsoft to enable the security by pressing this button. And it's that stage that the script set off, and down comes the payload at that stage. So sometimes it's not possible to identify, if you like, from the Word document or from the email coming in that there's anything malicious there, because actually there's nothing malicious there at that stage at all. The payload is coming down in a different way. So just thought I'd mention that before getting too off. But let me just carry on with this particular example and just talk you through how we view it and how we tackle it. And again, I said at a very high level. So in fact, we in this scenario, our web threat shield, which is that first little triangle there, if you like, or diamond, should I say there, protects the user from visiting known malicious sites by obviously looking up the URL and the IP reputation, and actually starts to use our Bright Cloud threat intelligence data in real time. Now, to give you some idea of a scope of IP and IP reputation, we have about 50 other vendors that OEM this technology from us. I'm not sure they'll do IP rep, but many of them do. So actually our visibility of IP and what's going on the internet is huge. Plus the fact we scan the internet about three or four times a day and have like 95% coverage of the entire internet, including IPv4 and B6. So, it's part of our, if you like, our other business, which is, our OEM business, where we supply threat intelligence to other vendors, is very significant in this. And this plays in real time. So we're able to stop a lot of things happening just by simply knowing that communication is trying to get to a command and control center, or it's a malicious IP address, or it's a malicious domain that we know about. There's just a whole lot of different factors we can actually bring to leverage very rapidly there. And that does a really great job of doing that. The problem is that, of course, one layer like that is never going to be perfect. So what we tend to do, we have a failure rate there. So and when we have that, and when we're not sure, we don't have enough information to make the decision, then we have something called our real-time anti-phishing. And again, that's a service. We sort of had it in Bright Cloud for a number of years, but it's also something we developed with actually another security vendor to stop high net worth individuals being spear phished, because it was, that was a problem 3 or 4 years ago, never mind the problem that's appearing now generally in the marketplace. So this product's been under development for a while. I've just noticed, in fact, just an aside to everybody, that Gmail have just introduced a real-time anti-phishing service using machine learning, using AI, and probably quite similar to what we're doing in some ways. But the interesting thing about this service is what it does is before the user gets to the URL, what you're doing is you're performing a whole lot of, if you like, behavioral and factual tests, if you like, on the website and URL they're going to. So you can start to determine if that's a phishing site or not. And really what we find is between the Web Threat Shield and our real-time anti-phishing service, we'll probably knock out 99% plus, and high 99%, if you like. So we're up, the 0.5, 0.6, if you like. We'll actually knock out a lot of those phishing links and phishing sites at that stage, or because there's sufficient information. But as I said, there's different delivery methods, so it just gives you some idea. It's a very effective way of actually starting to do that. And again, this is all preventative stuff. This is before the user actually, anything's downloaded onto the user machine or anything has come into the actual network in that sense. Of course, what then happens is that something does start to come down, and when we have, again, we're quite, Webroot is quite unique in the way it deals with malware and the way we do it compared to other people. We have what we call our real-time shield there, and that's basically looking at partial information about any files that are coming down from that source and trying to predict with a high degree of accuracy whether those things are things we've seen before and if they were malicious or not. So the real-time shield is really basically, it's a very good way of saying, we know this is looking like a good thing, or this is looking like a bad thing. And obviously in this particular scenario, it's going to say it's a bad thing, or it should be saying it's a bad thing, but hey, we haven't seen everything, and as I said, everything's polymorphic, everything's new, and there's also new sort of we get tested against just like the other vendors do. So it's, again, nothing's 100%, but again, we get a lot of malware at this stage. And I'll go on a little bit how we deal with malware and our results that way a little bit later. So the real-time shield does with that, and if it's known bad, obviously we block it. So again, it's something, the file hasn't even fully downloaded. It's still a sort of a partial thing that's going on there. We're still sort of looking at partial information. But eventually, of course, everything starts to arrive on the machine. And then we're interested in behaviors. And again, as I said, at this stage, most companies, most other vendors, real-time shield stage or behaviors, if you want to think at that stage, that infection stage, they've had to make their decision. They've said, this is something bad, and they've stopped it. Whereas with us, if we've not got enough information at this stage, we actually can carry on, and we have our behavior shield. We have all our shields and come in and all the ways we deal with files and processes running on the machine to make sure that the machine can't be damaged, and we turn on our monitoring and journaling, which is very important, so we can eventually roll back and remediate. So behavior is looking at those stages. Again, we have like 13 billion file behavior records. So if you like, we've got a huge amount of data. That's because we've been doing this since about 2010, 2011, if you like, when the consumer product first came out. So we've got a huge amount of data that we built up, and again, because of our systems, this is all available real time and pretty instantly. So this is all happening in the milliseconds case, but. So we're predicting, and we're also sort of looking at that behaviors and deciding whether that's malicious or not. And then the next stage, quite interesting, obviously, it's just auto remediation. We have actually, if we decide, and it can take us some time, and then you'll see the slide in a second where it describes sort of the time period we take and how effective we are at stopping just malware generally. Obviously, after some time, if we then decide it's malicious, we can actually take that particular endpoint, and we will sort of like surgically, take it back to, take the host drive anyway back to exactly as it was before those files or things arrived on the device. So it's a very effective way of stopping malware in that sense as well, not only phishing but all sorts of malware. So that leads me to the next slide. I think vendors should be sort of far more open and far more transparent about how well they actually stop malware. And we've got a very good indication of that, exactly how well we're doing, because obviously from the support calls, through the visibility we see of what's happening on each individual device, because we protect each device individually. So that gives a sort of a little perspective. So this is actually for the whole of 2016. So we just aggregated all these things together to give you some sort of idea about what goes on. And when it comes to things like new or never before seen executable files that we've processed, basically we found that 1 in 40, and that's 2.5% of those new executable files, would be categorized as malware. So that's quite a significant percentage. And if you look around there, you can see that the majority of those we stop instantly. We recognize instantly that this is malware, or it's got the predictive characteristics of malware, and we'll stop it then. But you see, so I'd say that our hit rate there, if you like, is high 80%. Nothing's being infected, but I mean that's the recognition there. And then after an hour, 56% of those previously unseen executables are identified as malicious in that first hour of the ones that are left, if you like, ones we haven't done instantly. And then after 12 hours, 90%. And actually, we've done some MRGF tests, and so it shows us after 24 hours. And usually we've cleaned everything up by 24 hours. But I think overall we find our efficacy average is about 99.7%. So I would just say that for us is like a low, so no one say guaranteed rate, but a low rate of what we do on average consistently throughout. We're still missing stuff there, as you can see. There's still things happening, and you get different sort of things going on there. But as far as I'm concerned, that's probably one of the best efficacy rates in the industry. And a lot of reason why MSPs use this is because it's something we consistently deliver to them. So that's really it. About 35, 36 minutes, 37 minutes we've taken. Just to say that this, the 2017 MSP Cybersecurity Trends, that 500 MSP plus survey is available, and we will make it available to everybody attendee today. And that really at this stage, I'm just quite happy to throw us over to questions.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, George. I got a couple quick ones here for you. So somebody asked the anti-phishing that you talked about. Is that an add-on to the Webroot product, or is that included in the solution?
Now that's included in the solution. We built that in. We actually put that service and integrated that service into the solution last November, so it's almost a year ago now, and it's part of our web threat shield. We didn't split it out so obviously as we have here in the presentation, but no, it's included in its in, and we've got a great just on that point in some ways. Webroot have got a great emphasis on the fact that you pay us to stop malicious files, ransomware, whatever it happens to be. Any form of malware, and that's our job. And so we're not a great believer in add-on products to do that. We believe you pay us to do that. That's the job we're paid to do. We should deliver that in the product that we're selling to you, and not as an add-on or as an extra. And that's just an attitude among the sort of the people I work with and among us all. I think that's very key. I think I've seen lots of add-ons come through. I'm sort of conflicted by that, and I think the rest of us are here as well, because we feel that you've already paid for an AV or whatever it happens to be. It should be doing all those tasks. I mean, it's supposed to stop malware, full stop. It's not supposed to be something special for ransomware, and it sort of infers that the product that they are selling you in the first place is not very good at stopping ransomware anyway. So they're asking you to pay twice for something that doesn't do its job being very good the first time. So as I said, we're rather conflicted by that, and I think that for that reason our belief is that we should put all the good stuff should go into the product, and it should be inclusive and not be something we're charging extra for.
All right. Yep. Perfect. I guess not along the same lines, but similar way. So does the kind of the phishing and all those solutions work fine with Office 365 mail clients?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So there's a kind of someone's asking a general overview question here. Do you have any major differentiators that kind of make Webroot's performance better than what your competitors have?
I think the reason we're so consistently good at stopping things is our main differentiator, and the fact that we are not tied down to a very rapid instant in time to make a decision whether something is malicious or not. So that whole idea of being able to allow unknown files and things to actually arrive on a device and take time to then decide whether they are malicious or not and what their true intention is, and at the same time protect the machine and protect the user and stop data exfiltration and do all those different things and protect the system itself. That is a huge differentiator. And because we're able to take the time, it means we're gathering more and more information, and we're able to apply more and more intelligence to doing that. So the bottom line of that is you're not only protecting and preventing, but you're actually doing that with a good accuracy in that sense, but you're also doing it with a good accuracy in the sense is you don't get any false positives or false negatives either. So, it's really a very different way of sort of dealing with malware. Whereas all our competitors, I don't know anyone who's doing it any differently, is having to make that decision at that point in time, which is very close to that point of infection, and that's all they've got. And if they get it wrong, then they get it really badly wrong, and they're having to do it with the information they have at that point in time. So I think for us, it's the fact we leveraging the cloud in a big way and leveraging threat intelligence in a big way, plus what we're actually seeing happening on that individual device, and being able to manipulate that in real time and come up with a very, very accurate determination in real time of what's going on, which makes us very different. Whereas a lot of other products tend to be either far more standalone, have larger clients, tend to try and do a lot more work on the device itself and not use so much real-time threat intelligence input, or they tend to be, some of the next generation ones are very focused on just looking at that file behavior side and nothing else, and they have very little protection outside that. So they don't stop things very early on, and that's one of the things I think all our vendors, all the endpoint vendors are trying to do is stop attacks as early as possible. at that sort of you want to stop at that, the earliest stages possible when you see the first hint of something, be able to sort of get rid of it, because the more you leave it, the more difficult it becomes to deal with it down, and obviously unknown attacks particularly. So, sorry, I'm butchering on today, giving long explanations today, but I hope that helps. I hope that sort of explains it anyway.
No, that's good. Thanks. So I've got one here. You might not be able to answer this one exactly. It might be a little roadmap related. But do you guys have any plans, or do you actually have any provide any forensics for kind of how a threat propagated on a system? Kind of an explanation.
Again, we've had sort of I suppose we've had a sort of slightly different attitude to that than other vendors. We looked at what people call EDR, and endpoint detection response, which is very much about forensics and kill chains and those areas. At the moment, we only do something we have a dwell time report, which is again fairly unique in the industry. I don't know if anybody else is doing dwell time reporting. So we'll report the time we saw an infection, what device it was on or device it was on, how long it took us to remediate that, and when it was removed from that device, and what that infection was and what it involved, and there's some sort of summary data about that attack. But it doesn't look like it came in through the firewall. It doesn't do sort of like that sort of kill chain type information. The answer to this is yes and no. We do some EDR and we do some forensics in the product, but we tended to limit it because when we asked MSPs, do they want this information? Most of them said no, we don't want it. We're not going to go back and analyze that, and we're not running SIMs and CMs. We're not running ability to correlate and contextualize around that customer and do things in that way. So we have sort of not followed that route. But, and here's the big but, we did buy a company last year called CyberArm. We are working on certain things at the moment which are I think takes that EDR to the next level, and also takes it to a level where it's more practical and more useful for the MSP to use. So what I'm really saying is, we very much direct our product development to the MSP. The MSPs have said that wasn't useful, but they did say a number of things that would be useful. We have got some very interesting, I wouldn't say bleeding edge, but definitely leading edge technology that we're going to bring to market with MSPs early next year, and it will start to go a long way of answering those questions about EDR and giving forensics and answering that side of it. But as I said, the real problem was that MSP said, well, actually, that's not useful to me. It's not going to give me enough information, or I'm not going to be able to use that information to stop things happening again. And I don't have a lot of MSPs are very small. They don't necessarily even have the expertise, if you like, in-house to be able to take that information and actually use it in an actionable way. And in fact, when we look at the market, only about 2% of all the companies globally that have that capability really to do, what I would call, in-depth use of EDR and forensics information.
Got it.
A long answer again.
No, it makes sense. So someone here asking for, I guess you could go short or long on this. Can you explain the remediation process aspect?
Yeah, I can. It's very straightforward. We protect the host drive. So if you like usually the C drive of a device, what happens is when we see when the file is actually going to start to come down, we will turn on something called monitoring and journaling. So monitoring basically it monitors everything that happens. We journal certain things. There's a whole lot of other strategies going on, by the way, to sort of contain things and stop things happening. But the whole idea is that we have built up sort of a cache, if you like, of the information of the changes that have been made by that particular file and process during the time we are not sure whether it's malware or not. So, and very simply, when we discover it's malware, we obviously stop, block it, quarantine it, put it away. But at the same time, we're able to use that journal to actually undo, if you like, all the changes that have been made to the system by that particular file or those processes, while they've been under review, if you like. So it's a very surgical way of taking machines back. And why we did that was that a lot of the time, even with with other products, if you like, on the marketplace, you get infected, even if they stop it and manage to stop it at an early stage, they have no way of automatically taking that machine back to where it was. So you might know the kill chain, you might know what happened in some detail, but you don't know it down to the individual DLLs and that sort of area. So really, what people were faced with was the thing is, well, if I don't have that sort of surgical rollback, if you like, a surgical remediation, I've got to basically take that machine away from that user. I've got to rebuild it because I don't know what's been done to it at the lowest levels, and then give it back to them. So that whole process for an MSP was quite expensive. So the fact that we built in the remediation route to try and stop that reimaging budget process happening at all, and to keep the cost lower for MSP. So even if someone was getting sort of semi-infected, if you like, we could actually take that machine back, and they wouldn't have to worry about having to take it out of action and reimage it. I'm sorry, it was a slightly long answer, but
no, perfect. That was straight and to the point. All right, so I've got another one here asking about, I guess it's along the same lines of phishing. Is the mail being routed through your services, and if so, how do you handle things like, I guess, ITAR, similar, or probably HIPAA and things like that?
Yeah, we're not. It's not being routed through us at all. So the MSP will buy an email service of such, and it's then the result of the user. As soon as the user obviously interacts on a device level with that particular mail client, wherever it happens to be, that's when we're coming into action. So we've got nothing to do with the email filter side of it ourselves at all. We don't run an email service at all. I'm afraid to say we did, but we don't know.
All right, perfect. So let's see. Someone here is asking, do you think that user education is one of the most important parts of preventing malware?
Well, since I've just bought a user education company, a security awareness training company, I don't think you're going to get any other answer out of me. But yes, but to be more serious about that, and actually to be more logical about that, that whole area of security education has basically been something that we've all. I use the phrase lip service. I'm not sure if that's, I'm a Brit. That means we talk about it, but we don't actually do anything about it. So we give it, we say we're going to do something and not. And really, I think probably up to a couple of years ago, you maybe could get away with that to some extent, except in a highly compliant environment. We had to go through things. We sell obviously online here, so we handle credit cards. So actually, every Webroot staff member goes through PCI, compliance training every year and has to pass PCI exam and certs, etc. So there's things you have to do because of things the business do. But outside that, I think people are doing very little. But as you can see from the Verizon information, that's all phishing attacks. So someone would say that if you can reduce phishing and you can do phishing simulation, you can train people to look at phishing, and to at least take the obvious things out of the equation, you're going to be able to reduce your infection rates, your user-generated infection rates considerably. But security is a lot wider than phishing. There's a whole lot of things users can do to both make their own lives safer as well as their organizations. So to me, the security education thing, it's a critical element. It's become more and more critical. It's so, the cyber criminals now so target us as users and our psychology as users that it's really becoming important for us to be far more aware and far more on top of those things. So the answer is yes. Obviously, it has a beneficial. I wouldn't say it's the most important. It's like every layer. It's another layer in the security framework that you have, and the security posture you have. But it's become an extremely important one, and it's also now because of SaaS services and cloud-based services, it's become something that's actually far more cost-effective and simpler and easier to deliver. And as I said, I sort of feel that a security company like ourselves is actually taking that up the cudgel for the first time. Because I know. Actually, I'll mention so far, I know do a phishing type thing, but I don't think they do much outside that. And I know Symantec might do sort of enterprise-level training and courses, but actually, there's no other what I'd call endpoint security vendor really taking on that whole area and saying, actually, we've got so much information and so much stuff we can make training really work for people that do that. I've just had my laptop fire at me here, Miles, so I'm glad you can still hear me.
Yep, you're still good. All right. So you kind of covered some of this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. So what is being done to stop ransomware, like a ransomware process, once the actual program has been executed on a user's machine?
Well, you're trying to stop it obviously at an extremely early stage, so and before it gets into encryption. We're actually looking obviously at the behavior of the files at that time and trying to make a decision then. So we're saying, does this exhibit any ransomware behavior? It's very, very early on stage, and you're just trying to stop it then and there. And again, as I said, if it's made any changes, and we're talking, a lot of the time we're talking, milliseconds here. We're talking very short spaces of time. You're stopping it in quarantine and then rolling back anything that's done. So,
Got it.
but there's a whole lot of, I could go into a whole lot of proprietary things, which I'm probably not allowed to talk about, so I'm not going to. But there's a whole lot of things that we do, obviously, to stop ransomware. And, with so many MSPs as our customers, I think we've got now over 9,000, approaching 10,000 MSPs, and you've got to think then of all the businesses they service and the impact that ransomware would have on them as a company, as an MSP, as a customer, never mind the customers and clients they're serving in the sense of, time to remediate, recoveries, etc. Our focus is pretty razor on stopping ransomware in different ways the whole time. So we've got some new things we've put in the product. Again, we're not shouting about that a lot, but we just keep building it in. So I said, rather than our attitude has been, rather than produce extras, if you like, that we charge for, we're trying to build that stuff in.
All right, perfect. So similar lines. Are there any like kind of new trends with malware, ransomware that you're kind of seeing right now, seeing immediately coming along the lines that people should kind of be on the lookout for?
I don't think anything past the things that they're seeing. I'm not seeing, if you like, a terrific new exploit method that I haven't seen before. There was a lot over the last 12 months of a lot of new exploits being used, a lot of new different ways in, but not seeing anything particular. That funny enough, I was with my threat team day before yesterday, and I said to them, are you seeing anything, new? And they said, no, not really. So not even seeing it in the wild at the moment. And I think the other thing you understand, there's been a lot of takedowns. There's a lot of proactive things going after, different parts of the dark web, going after different sort of syndicates that we know run these things. I think the only thing that's obviously, I think we've all seen, is the appearance of state actors into the scene in a far larger scale and far more visibility than we've ever seen before. So that's the thing that probably is most worrying. That states are the biggest hackers, basically. So that's slightly more concerning, because obviously they're, whether that's for, we've seen North Korea go after different assets, not necessarily, and they're not necessarily going after governmental assets. They're going after industrial assets, after Sony Corporation because they published a film, if you like. So that's the only thing I think that's probably a little bit more worrying. And obviously we're seeing a lot of the information that was released from NSA and came through shadow brokers, and a lot of those exploits being used in the marketplace. So things that were not available to the cyber criminals 12 months ago now being sort of regularly mined and used against us, if you like. So those are the things we're seeing. It's not so much new. It is new in that sense that it's maybe an exploit we don't know about, but it's. Sorry, that's about the most accurate way I can answer that at the moment.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It seems like the ransomware model in general kind of seems to be profitable and effective right now, and so people are kind of sticking with it and have no reasons kind of to develop anything new or fancy to kind of go on, just kind of make new variations and find new attack vectors.
Yeah, and I think the thing about that is that shows no sign of growing. As I said at the beginning, that's all charging on. There's far too much money involved now for them to back out of that. I think it's just that it's a bit more confusing who's doing what, when, and where, and to who. As I said, the NotPetya was a good example of that, where there was no intention of really giving the data back or recovering the data back. and it started off as an attack, against a political target, and very much, became affected a whole lot of things like, the UK National Health System. A whole lot of targets were sort of probably unintended targets and byproducts of that particular attack. But it just showed that, there's, even paying up, because we, had people say in the survey that would pay up. Even if you're paying up, there's no guarantee you're going to get that data back at all. So whatever strategy you have in place, it must really be one of thinking that, paying up is not really an option, and I need to have things in place that will be resilient enough to stop when I see an infection, to either stop that infection right away, or that if ultimately, because we're not perfect, none of the vendors out there, even the ones that are offering anti-ransomware, are not going to give you 100% coverage. Something will get through, because the guys will just test against those products. They'll find ways around those products. That's part of the, I hate to use the phrase the game, but it's part of the cyber criminals game, and they're well funded these days, so they can afford to do this. Especially the ransomware guys can afford to do it. So you're going to get clients hit, and you're going to have something in place that's that's going to make them recover and get their business back. And as I said, as also was in the survey, there's a whole lot of different lines of defense, but the backups. We did a lot of work with Dato, which are a backup company, and we've done a lot of joint marketing with them. And just because both of our things resonate, if we fail, then you've got the backup to sort of get things back. We don't like saying that. None of the vendors want to fail, but we do. So,
yep.
But our job is just to make sure that failure is absolutely minimized, and I believe we do a good job of that as well. But that's great.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so George, I think we're actually going to wrap it up there. We only got a couple minutes left, and so I know we've been running a little long on the answers, so I'll leave everybody there a couple minutes of time left. Just want to thank you, George, for all the information. Everything's been great. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and thank you for listening in. We hope you learned something, and we hope to see you again on another webinar with the Business Solutions Network and MSP Insights and Webroot. Have a great rest of your day.